The seventh chapter and the first verse. Temple dedication. When Solomon finished praying, a bolt of lightning out of heaven struck the whole burnt offering and sacrifices, and the glory of God filled the temple. The glory was so dense that the priest couldn't get in. God so filled the temple that there was no room for the priest. When all Israel saw the fire fall from heaven and the glory of God filled the temple, they fell on their knees, bowed their heads, and worshiped, thanking God. Yes, God is good. His love never quits. Then the king and all Israel worshiped, offering sacrifices to God. King Solomon worshiped by sacrificing 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep at the dedication of the temple. They did a lot of slaughtering back then. Wow. The priests were all on duty. The choir and the orchestra of Levites that David had provided for singing and playing anthems to the praise and love of God were all there. Across the courtyard, the priests blew trumpets. All Israelites were on their feet. Solomon set apart the central area of the courtyard in front of God's temple for sacred use, and there sacrificed the whole burnt offerings, grain offerings, and fat from the peace offerings. The bronze altar was too small to handle all these offerings. This is how Solomon kept the great autumn feast of booths. For 7 days, there were people there all the way from the far northeast to the entrance to Hamath, to the far southwest, the brook of Egypt, a huge congregation. They started out celebrating for 7 days and then did it for another 7 days, a week for dedicating the altar and another for the feast itself, 2 solid weeks of celebration. On the 23rd day of the 7th month, Solomon dismissed his congregation. They left rejoicing, exuberant over all the good God had done for David and Solomon and his people Israel. God's confirmation. Solomon completed building the temple of God in the royal palace and the projects he had set his heart on doing. Everything was done. Success, satisfaction. God appeared to Solomon that very night and said, I accept your prayer. Yes, I've chosen this place as a temple for sacrifice, a house of worship. If I ever shut off the supply of rain from the skies or order the locusts to eat the crops or send a plague on my people, and my people, my God-defined people, respond by humbling themselves, praying, seeking my presence, and turning their back on their wicked lives, I'll be ready for you. I'll be there ready for you. I'll listen from heaven, forgive their sins, and restore their land to health. From now on, I'm alert day and night to the prayers offered at this place. Believe me, I've chosen and sanctified this temple that you have built. My name is stamped on it forever. My eyes are on it and my heart in it always. As for you, if you live in my presence as your father David lived, pure in heart and action, living the life I've set out for you, attentively obedient to my guidance and judgments, then I'll back your kingly rule over Israel. Make it a sure thing on a sure foundation. The same covenant guarantee I gave to David, your father, I'm giving to you. Namely, you can count on always having a descendant on Israel's throne. But if you or your sons betray me, ignore my guidance and judgments, taken up with alien gods by serving and worshiping them, then the guarantee is off. I'll wipe Israel right off the map and repudiate this temple I've just sanctified to honor my name. And Israel will be nothing but a bad joke among the peoples of the world. And this temple, splendid as it is now, will become an object of contempt. Tourists will shake their heads saying, what happened here? What's the story behind these ruins? Then they'll be told the people who used to live here betrayed their God, the very God who rescued their ancestors from Egypt. They took up with alien gods, worshiping and serving them. That's what's behind this God-visited devastation. 2 Chronicles chapter 8, more on Solomon. At the end of 20 years, Solomon had quite a list of accomplishments he had. He had built the temple of God in his own palace, rebuilt the cities that Hiram had given him and colonized them with Israelites, marched on Hamath Zobah and took it, fortified Tadmor in the desert and the all-store cities he had founded in Hamath, built the fortress cities Upper Beth Horon and Lower Beth Horon, complete with walls, gates, and bars, built Baalath and store cities, built chariot cities for his horses. Solomon built impulsively and extravagantly, wherever whim took him, and in Jerusalem and Lebanon, wherever he fancied. The remnants from the original inhabitants of the land, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, all non-Israelites, survivors of the holy wars, were rounded up by Solomon for his gains of slave labor. The policy is in effect today, but true Israelites were not treated this way. They were used in his army and administration, government leaders and commanders of his chariots and charioteers. They were also the project managers responsible for Solomon's building program operations, 250 in all in charge of the workforce. Solomon brought Pharaoh's daughter from the city of David to a house built especially for her, because he said, my wife cannot live in the house of David, king of Israel, for the areas in which the chest of God has entered are sacred. Well, why'd you marry her in the first place then? Bringing up a heathen from Egypt. Heathen. Then Solomon offered whole burnt offerings to God on the altar to God that he built in front of the temple porch. He kept the regular schedule of worship set down by Moses: Sabbaths, new moons, and the 3 annual feasts of unraised bread, Passover, weeks, Pentecost, and booths. He followed the practice of his father David in setting up groups of priests carrying out the work of worship, with the Levites assigned to lead the sacred music for praising God and to assist the priests in daily worship. He assigned security guards to be on duty at each gate. That's what David, the man of God, had ordered. The king's directions to the priests and Levites and financial stewards were kept right down to the fine print. No innovations, including the treasuries. All that Solomon set out to do, from the groundbreaking of the temple of God to its finish, was now complete. Then Solomon went to Ezion-Geber and Elath on the coast of Edom. Hiram sent him ships, with them veteran sailors. Joined by Solomon's men, they sailed to Ophir in East Africa, loaded on 15 tons of gold, and brought it back to King Solomon. 2 Chronicles 9. The queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's reputation and came to Jerusalem to put his reputation to test. Asking all the tough questions, she made a showy entrance, an impressive retinue of attendants and camels loaded with perfume and much gold and precious stones. She emptied her heart to Solomon, talking over everything she cared about. And Solomon answered everything she put to him. Nothing stumped him. When the queen of Sheba experienced for herself, Satan, Solomon's wisdom, and saw with her own eyes the palace he had built, the meals that were served, the impressive array of court officials, the sharply dressed waiters, the cupbearers, and then the elaborate worship extravagant with whole burnt offerings at the temple of God, it all took her breath away. She said to the king, "It's all true. Your reputation for accomplishment and wisdom that reached all the way to my country is confirmed. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it for myself." They didn't exaggerate. Such wisdom and elegance, far more than I could have ever imagined. Lucky the men and women who work for you, getting to be around you every day and to hear your wise words firsthand. And blessed be your God, who has taken such a liking to you, making you king. Clearly, God's love for Israel is behind this, making you king to keep a just order and nurture of God-pleasing people. So then gave the king 4.5 tons of gold and sack after sack of spices and precious stones. Oh, she gave the king 4.5 tons of gold and the spices and stones. There hasn't been a cargo of spices like the shipload the queen of Sheba brought to King Solomon. The ships of Hiram also imported gold from Ophir, along with fragrant saddlewood and expensive gems. The king used the sandalwood for fine cabinetry in the temple of God in the royal palace, and for making harps and dulcimers for the musicians. Nothing like that shipment of sandalwood has been seen since. King Solomon, for his part, gave the queen of Sheba all her heart's desire, everything she asked for. She took away more than she brought. Satisfied, she returned home with her train of servants. Solomon received 25 tons of gold annually. This was above and beyond the taxes and profit on trade with merchants and traders. All kings of Arabia and various and assorted governors also brought silver and gold to Solomon. King Solomon crafted 200 body-length shields of hammered gold, about 15 pounds of gold to each shield, and about 300 small shields about half that size. He stored the shields in the house of the forest of Lebanon. The king made a massive throne of ivory with a veneer of gold. The throne had 6 steps leading up to it with an attached footstool of gold. The armrests on each side were flanked by lions. Lions, 12 of them, were placed at either end of the 6 steps. There was no throne like it in any other kingdom. King Solomon's chalices and tankards were made of gold, and all the dinnerware and serving utensils in the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Nothing was made of silver. Silver was considered common and cheap in the time of Solomon. The king's ships, manned by Hiram's sailors, made a round trip to Tarshish every 3 years, returning with a cargo of gold, silver, and ivory, apes, and peacocks. King Solomon was richer and wiser than all the kings of the earth. He surpassed them all. Kings came from all over the world to be with Solomon and get in on the wisdom God had given him. Everyone who came brought gifts, artifacts of gold and silver, fashionable robes and gowns, the latest in weapons, exotic spices, horses, mules, parades of visitors, year after year. Solomon collected horses and chariots. He had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots, and 12,000 horsemen and barracks in the chariot cities and in Jerusalem. He ruled over all the kings from the river Euphrates in the east throughout the Philistine country, and as far west as the border of Egypt. The king made silver as common as rocks and cedar, as common as the fig trees in the lowland hills. He carried on a brisk horse trading business with Egypt and other places. The rest of Solomon's life and rule from start to finish, one can read in the records of Nathan the prophet, the prophecy of Ahijah of Shiloh. and in the visions of Edo the seer concerning Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Solomon ruled in Jerusalem over all Israel for 40 years. Solomon died and was buried in the city of David, his father. His son Rehoboam was the next king. 2 Chronicles chapter 10, King Rehoboam. Rehoboam traveled to Shechem, where all Israel had gathered to inaugurate him as king. Jeroboam was then in Egypt, where he had taken asylum from King Solomon. When he got the report of Solomon's death, he came back. Summoned by Israel, Jeroboam and all Israel went to Rehoboam and said, "Your father made life hard for us, worked our fingers to the bone. Give us a break. Lighten up on us, and we'll willingly serve you." "Give me," said Rehoboam, 3 days to think it over, then come back. So the people left. King Rehoboam talked it over with the elders who advised his father when he was alive. "What's your counsel? How do you suggest that I answer the people?" They said, "If you will be a servant to this people, be considerate of their needs, and respond with compassion, work things out with them, they'll end up doing anything for you." Now, that's good advice for today. Very good advice for leaders. But he rejected, fool. He rejected the counsel of the elders and asked the young men he'd grown up with, who are now currying his favor, "What do you think? What should I say to these people who are saying, 'Give us a break from your father's harsh ways. Lighten up on us'?" The young Turks he had grown up with said, "These people who complain, 'Your father was too hard on us, lighten up.' Well, tell them this: my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. If you think life under my father was hard, you haven't seen the half of it. My father thrashed you with whips. I'll beat you bloody with chains." 3 days later, Jeroboam and the people showed up, and just as Jeroboam had directed when he said, "Give me 3 days to think it over, then come back," the king's answer was harsh and rude. He spurned the counsel of the elders and went with the advice of the younger set. "If you think life under my father was hard, you haven't seen the half of it. My father thrashed you with whips. I'll beat you bloody with chains." Rehoboam turned a deaf ear to the people. God was behind all this, confirming the message that he'd given to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, through Ahijah of Shiloh. When all Israel realized that the king hadn't listened to a word they'd said, they stood up to him and said, "Get lost, David. We've had it with you, O son of Jesse. Let's get out of here, Israel, and fast. From now on, David, mind your own business." And with that, they left. Rehoboam continued to rule only those who lived in the towns of Judah. When King Rehoboam next sent out Adoniram, head of the workforce, the Israelites ganged upon him, pelted him with stones, and killed him. King Rehoboam jumped in his chariot and escaped to Jerusalem as fast as he could. Israel has been in rebellion against the Davidic dynasty ever since. Now, how can they be in rebellion? And verse 15 says God was behind all this. And then the man was a fool at how he talked to them. So no, All right, moving right along. 2 Chronicles chapter 11. When Rehoboam got back to Jerusalem, he called up the men of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, 180,000 of their best soldiers, to go to war against Israel and recover the kingdom. Just a fool. Just a fool. At the same time, the word of God came to Shemaiah, a holy man. "Tell this to Rehoboam, son of Solomon, king of Judah, along with all the Israelites in Judah and Benjamin. This is God's word. Don't you march out. Don't fight against your brothers, Israelites. Go back home, every last one of you. I'm in charge here." And they did it. They did what God said and went home. Rehoboam continued to live in Jerusalem, but built up a defense system for Judah all around. In Bethlehem, Etam, Tekoa, Beth Zur, Soko, Ajalon, Gath, Meresheth, Ziph, Adoram, Lachish, Azekah, Zorah, Ajalon, and Hebron. A line of defense protecting Judah and Benjamin. He beefed up the fortifications, appointed commanders, and put in supplies of food, olive oil, and wine. He installed arms, large shields and spears in all the forts, making them very strong. So Judah and Benjamin were secure for the time. The priests and the Levites from all over Israel came and made themselves available to Rehoboam. The Levites left their pastures and properties and moved to Judah and Jerusalem because Jeroboam and his sons had dismissed them from the priesthood of God and replaced them with his own priests to preside over the worship centers at which he had installed goat and calf demon idols. Everyone from all the tribes of Israel who determined to seek the God of Israel migrated with the priests and Levites to Jerusalem to worship there, sacrificing to the God of their ancestors. That gave a tremendous boost to the kingdom of Judah. They stuck with Rehoboam, son of Solomon, for 3 years, loyal to the ways of David and Solomon for this period. Rehoboam married, how come they didn't talk about Solomon's infidelities to God and how he brought in all those idols? Rehoboam married Mahlah, daughter of Jeremoth, David's son, and Abihail, daughter of Eliab, Jesse's son. Mahalath bore him Jeush, Shemira, and Zaham. Then he married Maacah, Absalom's daughter, and she bore him Abijah, Attai, Zisa, and Chilameth. Maacah was Rehoboam's favorite wife. He loved her more than all his other wives and concubines put together. That's a mess. And he had a lot, 18 wives and 60 concubines who produced 28 sons and 60 daughters. Nothing but a hot mess. Rehoboam designated Abijah, son of Maacah, as the first son and leader of the brothers. He intended to make him the next king. He was shrewd in deploying his sons in all the fortress cities that made up his defense system in Judah and Benjamin. He kept them happy with much food and many wives. This is the word.